What are the worst limited mechanics of all time? Mechanics that ruin limited because the cards are too powerful or too repetitive. Here's my list for the top 8 worst mechanics. And it has nothing to do with power level. In fact, some of the mechanics here are you're gonna see is way too powerful. At number 8 we have Undying. Undying is an ability that comes on creatures, and if the creature would die, instead it comes back with a +1/+1 counter on it. And it only does this if it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's like persist, except it comes back better. And because the creature comes back better, Wizards has to nerf the creatures to make this not too powerful. Let's take Near Heat Stalker as an example. 4 and a red for a 4/1 with Undying. 4 and a red for a 4/1 is a horrible stat line, but they kind of have to make creatures this way because otherwise they are too good. So why is Undying so awkward and limited? Well, first of all, your opponent never want to use a removal spell on them. So your opponent is in an awkward spot. Your opponent also doesn't want to attack into it. So what happens is that it creates these kind of stalls where your opponent don't want to attack into your Undying creature and can't use removal, and you don't want to attack either because your opponent just takes it or jumps it. Not in this case with Near Hit Stalker. So it's very hard to make a balanced Undying card. With Persist, on the other hand, you can make the creature reasonable because it comes back weaker. But just because the creature comes back stronger, it has to make the creatures underpowered, and that's not very fun. And as I said, it leads to board stalls, it's awkward to play against, and it's hard to play with either. I think the best way to utilize Undying is to have some sacrifice outlet, but I find Undying to not be a very fun mechanic, and we haven't really seen it in a regular set since Innistrad. At number 7 we have Fateful Hour, and this is an ability that comes both on creatures and or spells. So whenever you have 5 life or less, it does something extra. It can be a static ability on a creature, or it can be when you cast a spell. So for those of you who play with Death's Shadow, you know that it's not that easy to get down on life total in Limited. So in Constructor you can build your deck around Fateful Hour a little bit, but it's very hard to get down on 5 life in Limited unless your opponent cooperates. So that makes the ability very hard to get to work. So what happens is often that you play the card if it's okay, like Gather the Townsfolk is a card that's so plain, both Limited and Constructed. But that's mostly like create 2/1/1s, and then you get a little extra bonus when you have 5 life or less. So it's an ability that's hard to build around because you have very little control whether you're gonna get down to 5 life in Limited. And it also very random, and it also feels punishing to play against, because if you attack your opponent, get them down to 4 life, and then they cast this spell that gives them a huge bonus. And also it's hard to balance to get down your opponent. Should I get down my opponent down to 6 life so it doesn't help with Fateful Hour? It's a little bit of strategic element, but it's very awkward to play with because you can't set it up in a good way, and it's awkward to play against. It almost feels like throwaway. At number 6 for the worst mechanic we have Devoid. And this is not because it's too good or it's too bad, it's because it mostly feels like flavor text or very mechanical. It feels like it's a handheld that doesn't feel natural. So Devoid means the creature has no color, but it still can be a black-red card. So it is Forerunner of Slaughter here. It feels unnatural, and it doesn't really add much. Yeah, you can have creatures that pumps up other Devoid cards, but it just feels unnecessary and awkward, and it doesn't make for good gameplay. It feels like we're having a little bit extra flavor text on a lot of the card. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a very awkward mechanic. At number 5, Heroic. This might be a little bit controversial because I know some people like Heroic, but my problem with Heroic is that for it to work, it has to warp the Limited environment hugely. Heroic is an ability that means that when you target the creature with a spell, you get some kind of bonus. And that means that the Limited format has to have a lot of spells, otherwise Heroic's not going to trigger reliably. It also means the removal can't be too good, Because if the format is full of doom blades and murders, lightning strikes, your opponent just gonna kill the heroic creature in response. So my problem with heroic is that it warps the limited environment to become having a lot of unfun aspects in it. It has a lot of pump, auras, and has little removal. Another thing about heroic is that it creates this sort of battle cruiser magics, which means that the creature gets so large and everything becomes about the heroic creature. It doesn't feel like you're playing a regular game of Magic. You're playing this battle cruiser magic. It's all about the heroic creature. So I think heroic is a really bad limited mechanic because it warps the limited environment and makes it all about the heroic creatures. And that's why I don't like heroic. Though it is a nice feeling to pump up a huge creature with a bunch of auras and go to town. It feels good, but it gets old pretty fast. Number 4, we have Ripple. And this has only been seen in Cold Snap. And Ripple is a mechanic that means that when you cast a spell, you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You get to cast any additional copies for free. And of course, since you're casting that copy, you get to do the Ripple thing again. So there is Surging Sentinel, which is the example of this. 2 and a white for a 2/1 first strike and Ripple. So it's very awkward because, as you know, the ability to look at the top 4 cards of your library is random. You have very little control over it. There is no like Brainstorm, Senses, Divining Top in these formats. So it's gonna be very random. So sometimes you're gonna hit huge. You're gonna play Surging Sentinel, hit, and then hit again, and then your opponent is buried. And also just Surging Sentinel is extra awkward because it's a 2/1 first striker, which doesn't necessarily attack well. Although it of course can, you can play with pumps. But if you hit a bunch of Surging Sentinel 4, the ground is just completely locked down for your opponent to attack. So you can just sit back on this 2/1 first strike and your opponent can't attack. And so, of course, you might say, yeah, but you can just draft a lot of Ripple creatures. But that's also random and has a lot about the table. So if you don't see Ripple creatures, they're really bad. So not only is it random because of the way you look at the top of your library, it's also random in a draft. How many Surging Sentinels is going to get open? How many Surging Dementias, if you want to do that? And Ripple is just really random. And it's also unfun because when you hit big on a Ripple card, your opponent's going to feel terrible because it feels like they got luck sacked. And too much randomness. And the power level also was pretty high in Cold Snap for Ripple because the other cards wasn't necessarily that good. And if you draft the Ripple card and don't see anyone else, it's basically a wasted pick, so that's also not great. At number 3 we have Cascade, and this has a lot of same implication as Undying. Cascade is insanely powerful. Everyone who's played with or against Bloodbraid Elf, especially back in the day before power creep, knows that how bad Cascade feels. So first of all, Cascade is incredibly powerful. It's inherently a 2-for-1 if the card on the front is a regular card like Bloodbraid Elf or Bituminous Blast. So it's a 2-for-1 and it also has randomness attached to it. So what you're gonna hit, sometimes you're gonna hit a 1-drop, sometimes you're gonna hit like the perfect card, like with Bituminous Blast you can hit like a 4-drop and it feels insane. Now you can build your deck a little bit around that, you can avoid 1-drops, but it's very hard to play a limited deck without 2-drops. So if you hit an awkward 2-drop, it also feels random. So the problem with Cascade is that it inherently is card advantage, so you have to nerf the card. And some of the Cascades doesn't even feel like magic cards, like card that captured sunlight, gain 4 life Cascade. It's just a Cascade, it's a little bit of 4 life plus Cascade. Ardent Plea also is, sure, it's an artifact that's Exalt, but it's just, you're casting a random spell. So it's very swingy in what it does. It's very powerful, so the cards have to be kind of weak. And it plays out pretty badly, I would say. And it's not particularly good constructed either. I mean, with this living end, it feels like it wasn't meant to be a mechanic. Number 2 is Buyback. And this is an old mechanic from Tempest, which means you can pay an additional cost that varies, and then you can get the card back into your hand when it resolves. So if your opponent has got a counter spell, you don't get a card back. Or if the creature is removed, if it's a removal spell. Now the problem with Buyback is that it creates repetitive games. So you're doing the same thing over and over again, especially when it is a good card that's good as Capsize. Capsize is especially bad since you bounce in the creature. So not only is the opponent casting the same spell every turn with Capsize, you're replaying the same creature over and over. So one of the things that's fun about limited Magic is the repetitive nature of it. You're casting a spell and then it's done. If the creature sticks around, attacks or blocks, if it's a removal spell, discard, counter spell, it does the thing and then it's gone. The problem with Buyback is that it's just doing the same thing over and over again if the card is bad or if the card is good. If the card is bad, like Lab Rats, yeah, it's not the absolute worst, but you're not going to play it. If it's too good, it becomes very annoying to play with. I think one card that Modern Horizons got right was Recruit to Worthy. This is white mana for a 1/1 instant, and you get a 1/1 soldier, and it has buyback free. That card is actually sort of hits the sweet spot because that's not a card that's too good, so you're going to cast it over and over again, but it can be pretty nice to cast it with buyback and then cast it again without buyback. And it would be hard for me not to mention Sprout Swarm, one of the biggest offenders of buyback. Creates the same board state over and over again, creates a 1/1 that can be Chant Blocker too. So, what is the worst limited mechanic of all time? And my answer is number 1, Miracle. Now, Miracle is an effect that when you draw your first card every draw step, you can reveal it. And if it's a card with Miracle, you can then cast it for a reduced cost. It doesn't have to be your turn, it could be the opponent's turn too, but that doesn't happen too often. So, Miracle has been abused in Constructed with Senses Divine, Topper, Brainstorm, cards like that. But in Limited, at the very least how it was done in Advance in Restore, it didn't work like that. You're just gonna have to top deck the Miracle card. What you're gonna do, if you have like 4 or 5 Miracle cards, you're probably gonna Miracle some during your turn. So that's the first thing. Your opponent knows that you got lucky and hit a Miracle card because it's revealed. Your opponent clearly, obviously know that you top deck the card. I mean, sometimes you can suspect your opponent top deck the card the way the game was played out, but with Miracle you absolutely have 100% certainty that your opponent top deck the card. I mean, there is Bonfire of the Damned, there's a legendary clip on the internet that wasn't constructed. There's also Thunderous Wrath. Maybe your opponent has 4, you're at 5 life, your opponent has 4 lands, your opponent just top decks Thunderous Wrath and you just know you're dead because your opponent top decked. So, and another awkward thing is that when you draw the Miracle in the wrong spot, you may feel forced to play it because you couldn't play it otherwise. Let's say your opponent has no creatures in play and is at 20 life. You're stuck on 3 lands. If you top deck Thunderous Wrath, what are you gonna do? Just not play it? Probably not. But there are other spots when you draw a Miracle card and you don't really want to play it, but you kind of have to because you're gonna want to take advantage of the cheaper cost. So it's a very luck-based mechanic because you're gonna top deck it, and sometimes you're gonna top deck it in the wrong spot, and you can be put into very awkward spots. But another huge reason why Miracle is bad is it has to change how you physically play the game if you're playing in real life. Since a lot of people just draw the card and put it into their hand without thinking, you might miss out on the opportunity if you draw a Miracle card. Let's say you draw a Miracle card the regular way and just put it into your hand. Well, now you're in trouble because you want to cast it for the cheaper Miracle cost. You're going to have a hard time explaining to a judge that that was the card you drew this turn. It's going to be, the judge is probably going to say, no, you drew the card, put it into your hand. There's no way for us to know whether you just drew that card. So what you have to do is you kind of have to look at the top card every draw step and slowly draw it. And if it's a Miracle, you can say, haha, reveal it and play it. But if it isn't a Miracle, you can draw it the regular way. It's going to be especially awkward if you draw a Miracle card that you're not sure you want to play, or you're going to pause for like 10 seconds while you think you're going to cast a Miracle card or not. It's very awkward. And do you have to bluff? If you do have to do this every turn, so it makes the game go slower, everyone has to play more awkwardly physically. I just think Miracle is the absolute worst limited mechanic of all time, and I would hope that Wizard never brings Miracle back. So what limited mags you think is the worst for limited gameplay? You can let me know in the comments.